Take a pit stop for all things NASCAR with the Four Tire Change podcast. Here is your host, Dawson Iserlo.
Welcome back into Four Tire Change here on ESPN Southwest Louisiana. Dawson Iserlo with you after another really entertaining race in the NASCAR Cup Series. We are your podcast for everything NASCAR Cup Series related, race recaps, race previews, and everything in between here. And we get one at Darlington that had a lot of, I would say, expectations coming in, after what was just a fantastic finish, of course, at Kansas, everything that went along with it, the closest in NASCAR history. That momentum carrying over, throwback weekend, everyone always loves that. Darlington, one of the, most historic, if not the most historic track in the NASCAR Cup Series history, going all the way back to 1949. So, a lot of those kind of storylines and momentum pieces going into this thing made for what we thought was going to be a really good race. And honestly, early on, it was fairly tame, even though, ironically, of course, this track is nicknamed Too Tough to Tame. But you saw Kyle Larson handle stage one there. He was in a fantastic throwback to the old Kellogg's Terry Labonte machine. They made Labonte a part of the broadcast. I thought that was really cool that they brought him in. He, of course, wore the matching racing suits with Larson there in the pre-race ceremony. So all that was really great, and then Larson comes out and does really well early on. Even though Reddick qualified on pole, you're thinking maybe this is a Larson race. But then Reddick took control of this thing afterwards. Larson actually ends up having some issues. He spins a couple times. He kind of takes himself out of this thing. So it seems from there on out that it's going to be Tyler Reddick's race to lose. And in the third stage, a couple really interesting restarts happen. The other storyline that was emerging here, RFK Racing with Brad Keselowski and Chris Buescher. Buescher, of course, the heartbreak that was last week. They were fast again. This time, Brad Keselowski being even faster, it seemed like, than Buescher for the majority of this thing. He gets with Reddick on a couple of restarts here in the third stage. And in that last one, the long restart, he just had a great run. And they just battled it out for 6-7 laps. But eventually, they get into each other a little bit. And Chris Buescher makes an incredible move to the inside, taking it 3 wide into turn 1. He clears them both. And all of a sudden, it's Buescher's race to lose here with about 30 laps to go. Big-time move there. Obviously, we've seen that before. The leaders getting together at Darlington and the third-place car kind of coming through out of the wreckage is no new thing, and it was really exciting to see it happen. So, from there, what you had was Buescher trying to hold off Tyler Reddick, and Reddick was making some runs. It felt like Reddick was a little faster. I mean, look, he led 174 laps, I think was the final tally in this race. Career high for him. That was a really good sign for 23:11 because, by the way, Bubba Wallace was pretty good as well today. But in the end, Tyler Reddick tries to make a pass, kind of a Hail Mary throw there, sends it off into the turn, and doesn't clear. Buescher doesn't really come all that close to clearing him. Tries to get out of it, kind of tries to back out of the move when he sees it's not going to work, but the damage had been done. He slides up into Buescher, puts him into the wall, damages both of those race cars that we found out pretty soon thereafter. And it was kind of a weird moment, right? At first, Reddick really slowed up, and all of a sudden Keselowski goes by, and you go, it looks like Buescher made it through this whole deal, but Reddick, must have cut a tire. So Reddick gets to pit road, and the caution does not come out, I should say. But then shortly thereafter, Buescher, you can tell that he has suffered a similar fate. Looks like he also has tire damage. He has to pit on the green flag as well. Somehow a caution doesn't come out. A lot of rubber went on the track, but they did a good job keeping it green. And Buescher's out of this thing. And Brad Keselowski is the one who comes through. He was originally part of the battle for the lead that had the damage there and the carnage, and he ends up falling back. Well, now, because he's in third, he is the one who's the beneficiary of the two leaders getting into each other. Keselowski goes in the lead, and he would go on to cruise to his first win in quite a while. What a long, endless streak, more than 100 races. Brad K finally back in the winner's circle in the first time that he does so with RFK, the race team that he has his name a part of with his ownership stake as well. So let's start with Buescher. I mean, it's heartbreaking for him, and he obviously made it known that he was not happy with what happened with Tyler Reddick there, as they coincidentally were right next to each other on pit road after the race. Buescher came up, gave him a nice strong shove, and essentially asked for an explanation. Now the situation was somewhat diffused because Tyler Reddick said, look, I'm sorry, I messed it up. I screwed it up. He used some other language, of course, that was came through on the broadcast. But he said, I tried to send it. I tried to back out of it once I realized I wasn't going to make it, but I just couldn't do anything, and that's my fault. I'm sorry for taking you out. And Buescher, obviously, as you would expect, that wasn't quite good enough for him. He was basically saying, like, look, man, and we heard it come through. It was great. The Fox coverage this time was dynamite. We've done our fair share criticizing the broadcast. I thought this one was great. He goes, look, I don't have that win sticker on my car. He's pointing to Reddick's car, of course, the checkered flag denoting that Tyler Reddick has a win this season and is locked into the playoffs. He goes, I don't have one of those. Like, I needed this, and it's not fair for you to race me like that when we've always raced each other clean. And Reddick, again, just kind of said, I know, I'm sorry, man. I messed it up. The only problem I have with this is that it's not the first time Reddick's, kind of had that response in these situations. It's like he makes a move late and it doesn't work out and he's completely apologetic and like, it's my fault. Now, on the other end of it, he's been taken out before. You remember most famously, I would imagine, is the Bristol dirt race where Briscoe got into him. And he wasn't all that offended by it either. He kind of had a smile on his face, and he's just one of those kind of happy-go-lucky guys. So, I don't fault Reddick for what he did. Here's the deal. Does Buescher have the right to be angry? Absolutely. And you got to remember, and that's why the Cup Series is so great, because it's the continuation of the storylines, right? If last week doesn't happen, or let's say Buescher gets the win last week, right? He ends up winning it by .001 instead of losing it to Larson. I don't think his reaction would be the same. He wouldn't have that same level of frustration, but this is now a build-up. This was the culmination of him almost getting there last week and not getting there, and now you have 2 weeks of frustration built up, and you have another race-winning type car, RFK, delivering for Buescher 2 weeks in a row, and he sees another opportunity go by the wayside, and this time, instead of it just being, look, hard racing at the finish, and like he mentioned, yeah, maybe I could have done some things different, this time he's going, no, it was taken from me by somebody else's mistake. And that's why I'm mad. So I get his frustration, absolutely. And I think he was pretty solid about the thing. I mean, he gave him a shove. He didn't go up and throw a haymaker at him. He didn't walk up from behind him and try to blindside him or anything like that. He gave him a shove, and then he talked to him, and he kind of let himself cool down a little bit, and he walked away. On Reddick's side, I can't get mad at somebody for going for the win. Like, I just can't. Now, was it early? Yeah, there was more than 20 laps left. This was not the last lap. I think if it's the last lap of the race, it gets treated a little bit differently, and you probably feel a little bit differently about it. But we know how difficult it is to pass, and we know how important that clean air is. If Reddick really thought in that moment, which I believe he did, that this was his shot to get by, I'm not going to fault him for trying to make that move either. And it obviously didn't work out. There's a little bit of a debate of should he race him differently because of what Buescher said, right? I don't have that win sticker. I think drivers can be mindful of that, but at the end of the day, I don't think it means he's not going to go for the win. Now, maybe could he have waited a little bit longer for it? Sure, but again, if he did this move with 3 to go, neither one of them would have finished in the top 5 anyway, because they clearly both wouldn't have made it back around. They'd have had to pit, or they'd have had to try to limp it around and maybe brought out caution or something. It would not have ended well. So, all in all, man, I think it's great racing. I think it's unfortunate what's happened to Chris Buescher, and it's really unfortunate that it's compounded after a week in which he, just was on the wrong end of one of the greatest finishes in the history of the sport. But now he's still 12th in points. He did drop. The really unfortunate part about the way it happens is it's like he doesn't fall down and finish second or third here as a result, right? He finishes 30th because he has to make a pit stop on the green flag. So for Reddick, again, a guy who has a win, it's certainly less consequential. For Buescher, he's on that playoff bubble, and he needs good finishes, and he had a car that was obviously deserving of getting him a top 5 finish and maybe deserving of getting him a victory, and he doesn't get it. It's maybe a little bit sweetened. I don't know how much it's sweetened for Buescher, but it is a little bit sweetened that his teammate gets there. And Brad Keselowski, look, this has been a culmination of a great effort the last 3 years. The conversations when he left Penske, and look, I was critical of it. I didn't know if it made a ton of sense for him from a competitive standpoint, and it was a slow process, but they have clearly built this thing in. He's got a great teammate in Chris Buescher, who clearly is one of the more talented guys that I didn't give enough credit to for a long time. And now he's in victory lane. He's into the playoffs, which he was last year as well. This is big for the 6th team, and this is big for Brad Keselowski, I would imagine, as a team owner and a driver still in this series. So they get the big one. Ford gets their first win of the season. How about that? Can't believe it took this long. Ford's had success in the second half of the season plenty of times before. We'll see if this is an indicator of them kind of catching up. And it wasn't just the winner, of course, this race was Brad Keselowski, but you saw a lot of Fords up there in the mix. How about the Stewart-Haas effort? Josh Berry, Chase Briscoe right up there inside the top 10. Michael McDowell and Todd Gilliland had speed today, McDowell finishing 10th. Of course, while we're on McDowell, let's go ahead and bring that in. He decided he is leaving front row after the season. The first silly season domino to fall is Michael McDowell leaving for Spire. He'll drive the 71 car next year. Surprising, to say the least. I think from a pure speed and competitive standpoint right now, front row's ahead of Spire right now. But I get it, right? It's seeing moves into the future, and I imagine that McDowell has a little bit more information than we do about where these two organizations are heading. and he decides to make a move that he thinks is going to be better for him. Did I think he had a chance to maybe move to a car like Stewart-Haas in years past? Yes. Did he have those opportunities? Maybe so. Maybe he did and he turned them down. I don't know that. There was a little bit of rumor about it. Maybe he would go to the 21 car, but ultimately he goes to Spire, who has certainly put more competitive cars on the racetrack of late, but still has a long way to go. And we'll see if Michael McDowell, his veteran ability and his kind of calmness and his real consistency inside the car can bring a little bit more stability to that organization, and we'll see how that goes for them. But the Fords in general had a lot of speed. Ryan Blaney got cleaned out in this race by William Byron, unintentionally, but it certainly collected him, and he was not too happy about it. He showed that, drove back up onto the track, and kind of gave William Byron a little bit of a scare. I get it, too. Blaney's frustrated as well. A lot of the Ford drivers are, right? It's been that type of year. But that was unfortunate to see him get taken out because that 12 team was pretty fast. I don't know if they had race-winning speed, but they certainly were close. The other driver I wanted to mention that got a big finish is Bubba Wallace, because we've talked about that playoff bubble. It's kind of coming into focus here. We know which guys are going to be the ones kind of battling on that cut line, and Bubba, Chris Buescher, those are going to be some of the guys. Bubba had a tough run at Kansas last week. It was nice to see him back putting together a solid run here at Darlington, and we'll see if he can carry that momentum at all into what we're going to call the second half of the season. I say the second half of the season, not exactly the halfway point, but the All-Star race is next week at North Wilkesboro. Should be a lot of fun. Again, I don't know what we're going to learn. I hope North Wilkesboro puts on a great show and it ends up earning them a points race next year. That would be my hope for this weekend. We're going to go ahead and take a week off of four-tire change because it is the All-Star race next week, and just not as much to talk about. So when we come back in a couple of weeks, we'll have two races to recap there along with North Wilkesboro. But it should be a lot of fun, and it should be interesting. And, of course, we'll have the Coke 600 afterwards. So I'll go ahead and give my race winners for both the All-Star race and the Coke 600. Starting with the All-Star race, let's keep it simple, right? Let's go with Kyle Larson. I just like where the 5 team is. I think he made a mistake today. I think he's going to be trying to get that one back, so to speak. And, man, I love seeing that Kellogg's paint scheme, that throwback. Of course, it was actually the HendrickCars.com throwback here today. So I'll give Larson in the All-Star race, and then we get to the Coke 600. Let's see a Ford. Let's see that Ford momentum carry over, right? And I think that's got a chance to be the case. Why not Joey Logano, man? The Penske team has really looked more lost than ever. It's been surprising to see them struggle. Again, Blaney's been pretty consistent, but he's had some bad luck. Logano's been up and down. Let's see if Joey Logano gets it figured out and the Penske team gets another win when we go over to Charlotte, the Coke 600 in a couple of weeks. Should be a lot of fun. Until then, we will continue to keep it rolling. Appreciate all the support. We'll take our 1 week break here in the middle of the season, and then we'll be full steam ahead towards the playoffs with that last charge coming up here the next couple of months. We'll decide who is and who isn't a part of the NASCAR Cup Series playoffs. For everyone back at ESPN Southwest Louisiana, appreciate y'all for helping us put this on. And that'll be it. Another episode of Four Tire Change in the books.